I appreciate you hopping on. Why don't you just kind of give us a quick introduction on who you are and who you serve?
Yeah, I'm Michael Yang. Oh man, I hopefully serve myself. I think it's easy to serve other people constantly and remind myself to serve myself. I think especially now we're at like the end of the holidays where it's like a lot of thinking about other people. So now trying to like rope it back into my own personal world. So this talk is a nice opportunity to do that. But yeah, been making games for a long time, all sorts of games, little games, big games, board games, video games. I play a lot of games. And I also work out a decent amount, so like happy to talk about using your body for all sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. No, you're right, and it's January 2nd at the time of this recording, and so 100%, especially with with Christmas and everything like that, it's always about what can we do to serve other people and stuff like that. And I'm a big fan of helping others. I mean, that's kind of my whole business. I know it's kind of a cliche, but we do have to put our mask on first, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's to serve others, and that's kind of my overall philosophy with this. Is a lot of people live life like an NPC, and life passed them by, and we kind of have to become that main character. And so I like how you said that. And so playing lots of video games, making lots of games. I think you make video games and tabletop games. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like my biggest hit, I guess, is a card game called Compile that just released last August at Gen Con. But prior to that, I'd made video games for past more than 10 years. But actually, I originated like when I was little. I started with Dungeons and Dragons campaigns and things like that. So it's like yeah, I kind of go cycle through different things according to like what I feel capable of doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think D&D is like the perfect gateway drug, right?
Totally, yeah. Because it's like it's so flexible. Like I always like when I first started, I bought all the books, and I think very quickly, like I read through all of them, and then I very quickly I realized like oh the my favorite book is the Monster Manual. Like I actually don't really care about the rules too much. It's like too prescriptive, but the Monster Manual is like very eye opening, making a whole world and kind of like giving you a lot of levers to pull.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just like flip through the monster manual, I was just thinking about this yesterday. If you just flip through the monster manual and you can have more or less like a codex in your head of things that you can quick grab, then you can come up with encounters pretty much at any time, right? You don't have to have the monster manual next to you to come up with something because your players went completely off the rails as they normally do. You say, okay, well, you're going to encounter instead of like a group of orcs and bandits and stuff like that, like a lot of people do, it could be like, oh, you're encountering a zombie beholder with a group of undead. And it's like stuff that you can kind of have tools at your disposal because you've flipped through it and you looked at the pictures, you found that inspiration. And I think that that's something that most DMs could probably afford to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and I like that way of thinking about it. To me, it sounds like very engineer-like thinking, where you have a problem, which in this case, the problem you're describing is like make a whole campaign, which is such a big problem. It would be very easy to just never get started with it, or like try a bunch of different angles and not really be able to get any traction. And I like the idea of just flipping through the monster manual for pieces, tools, like little bits that you can pull from, and going through that process of like, here's the problem. How can I break the problem into little bits? And then what little tools can I apply to all the bits so that I can actually make some like measurable progress? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When I do my D&D prep, it used to be that if we're in writing terms, that architect, that person that has to have everything written out, and I would have like quite literally just blocks of dialogue written out. Like I was writing like a chapter in a book, and I'd have it like color coordinated so I know who's speaking and what's dialogue and what's not. And I'd have like, not exaggerating, probably like 10 pages of script pretty much for each session. And so my prep work was astronomically high. I think it was like 4 hours per one
Intense.
hour of game. And then now I've kind of flipped it completely upside down to where it's I have these story beats that I have, like these pieces of lore, this piece of world building, these plot points that I need. So I had these pieces to this puzzle, and I don't know how they fit together, and I kind of let the players figure out where they go. So that way, for example, if let's say you're in a kingdom and the king has lycanthropy and he's a werewolf and it's not known, but the players need to know. I could make it so that way only his like direct counsel know, the king's direct counsel know, and that's the only way that they're going to find out that the king is a werewolf, and the campaign can stall until they're able to find at least one of those people in the council, right? That could be a very railroady place to do it. Or I can have them be in a tavern and they hear rumors and whisperings of a werewolf, or when they're traversing, maybe they're out hunting for food and then they see maybe this ritual of druids trying to cure this curse of lycanthropy, or maybe they find tracks that they lead to, like, there's so many different ways that you can kind of say the same thing or get the players to the same point, but you allow the players to be the lead in it, and then you start dropping breadcrumbs where they are. That is actually called The Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, is the book that I use as kind of like the outline, and that has cut my prep down significantly and helps a lot, because if you do the legwork, like flipping through the monster manual, coming up with a small handful of encounters that you can pull out at any time, kind of like just like, again, tools in the tool belt, instead of having everything written out like an architecture, it's kind of more like a gardener, where we're just planting things and see how it grows and then tweaking and changing things as needed. And I think that's a very successful way to DM, at least for me, and it very much goes from railroading to following the rule of cool, which my players enjoy a lot more.
Yeah, it's like dynamic, and I think it's much easier for you, but also I think it leads to better player experience too. Like,
It does.
you don't want a player to feel like they're being driven in any way, right? Like, you want them to feel like they have agency in the space that you've created. And yeah, like, just like I've never read like books about DMing, but I kind of like apply a similar creative process to just how I work on any games. But similar to kind of what you described, just like make an outline, just who knows what information and what are their motivations. And then it's like, what's my motivation? Like, what's the player's motivation? I think that usually, like, with enough kind of like absorption of that information, I feel like that's enough of a foundation to just tell a story in real time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that kind of circles back to what I wanted to talk to you about, was getting into game development. And it sounds like that all stemmed from the gateway drug of D&D. But talk to me about how that got started. Where was that call to action, so to speak, or that catalyst that made you decide to turn your thoughts into a reality? Because you and I were talking before we started recording. I feel like probably every gamer in the world has some idea baked into their head, like a story they want to maybe turn their D&D campaign into a video game, or maybe their own campaign setting guide. Like, I think every gamer has some game idea in their head. And so what did you do to turn that into a reality rather than just a hope and a dream?
Yeah, when I was I think 11 in middle school, I bought all the books for AD&D, and my goal at the time was just like, how can I play games with my friends without demanding that, someone buy a console and have 4 controllers, which is like significant, financial investment. How can we as a group have lots of game for as little without having to bother our parents as much?
Right.
So I think, like, that goal is very measurable, right? Just like, how much does it cost, and then how much fun are your friends having, and that's like enough direction to get started, and not trying to aim any higher than that, because like that's all that was necessary. So at the time, I made a campaign. I was like really into Diablo 2, and then ended up making a campaign with like Diablo 2 characters in a Dungeon and Dragon setting, where it's, like kind of like a hack and slash thing, but there was like, we would have a rest phase where we'd like all be by the fire and talk, and be just like, us BSing about like what our characters are feeling and what they're doing. Actually very reminiscent of like how Baldur's Gate 3 feels, like the video
When you go to the camp.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Where it's like, you want to just like chill and spend some time getting into people's feelings, and like you get to be curious about the other players. And I think that was definitely the highlight. And I think I definitely I got lucky, that I made something that did resonate. I think what can happen frequently is people do have an initial motivation that they have, this like very pure, innocent hope in being able to realize, and like they're not lucky, and it just doesn't jive as well as it can, and that's like super demotivating. And then you don't really have any mentorship or anyone to like tell you to keep pushing through, and I think that's where like a lot of dreams end up dying. Yeah, so that first game got me started, and then making like custom maps in Warcraft 3, all games just for like me and my friends. No money needed to be involved. It was like just pursuing art for the sake of expression.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like it was, I'm doing this for the fun of the game, so to speak, rather than I'm doing this with the intention of monetizing it and making the next Baldur's Gate 3, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, a lot of it is luck. I think, people like to say kind of like ideas or a dime a dozen, but I think there's so much in any idea that any idea can be driven to, farther and farther into the realm, from my, desk to friends and fun into being monetarily successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like I just said, I think every gamer has a game idea in their head, but I think it's more than just luck. I think it's, if you do that first try and you're not as successful as you might think, or it's harder than you might think, a lot of people in that situation will give up. And it's not necessarily luck that keeps you going. It's, I want to do this for my friends. And that's like why I DM is I want to have a very similar situation to you where I want to have a good experience at the table where we're having a fun interactive time that we're in person, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. Video gaming obviously is a little bit differently, but you were talking about having a good cohesive experience for your friends, whether it's video games or tabletop games. And I think if you have that motivation to create something that is real and tangible, even in digital format, that will keep you going, even if you don't find it as easy as what others might view it as. And that's where YouTube comes in, right?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So I want to circle back. You said you started off creating D&D campaigns and then kind of migrated to you said Warhammer or Warcraft?
Warcraft 3.
Warcraft 3. So talk to me about, right now we're kind of just building stuff for fun. Where was the transition to when you said, okay, this could actually be something that I could make a few dollars on? Maybe not like make it big, be rich and famous or whatever, but where was that again, call to action to where you said, this is actually something that I could have be somewhat of a living?
It came really late. In high school, I actually thought I was going to go into the military, and then learned late that I couldn't because I have asthma, and they won't let you go through boot camp. So I ended up going to college, but it was kind of a surprise. Like, no one really directed me towards college when I was young. And when picking a major, I was like, okay, well, making games is cool. Like I've played at that point I'd played WoW for many years and had this huge, great community around me that was really important. I was like, how can I just participate in games more? And I thought that computer science was the thing that would get me the closest to that. And then after college, I ended up just getting a job in finance. Didn't even think about games. Didn't look for them. Didn't apply for them. There's really no pathway to getting into games. It just seemed like a holy grail that people just kind of fell into, and no one really talked about it. But finance was easy, that's very clear. You make money, you're near money, so therefore it's important and easy to measure success. And then I did that for a while, and I learned a lot, and I actually really enjoyed my job. And as I enjoyed the job more, I was able to focus more on that actual enjoyment and bring it back to serving myself more than just serving the job. And then I realized oh, maybe I've saved up enough money to take a chance on something. And then what was that chance? Oh, let me go try to make games. So I just quit my job and then started looking for work just across the country, just I'm 20, 21, 22 years old. So really easy to pick up and move. And I was willing to, I had already decided that I was willing to make that sacrifice of moving around to kind of explore this idea that didn't seem feasible in the past. And then ended up working at San Francisco State University just as a teacher's assistant for comp sci classes there. And they had a small games program. And then as a TA, that was kind of my first experience making games with other people, and that was so wonderful, able to talk design to other people and get feedback. And there's no right or wrong answers, right? We just we as a team just decide what's right and we just do it. And that really inspired me to look for more of that. And then that's how I ended up in Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I'm at now, just working on video games. Yeah.
Nice. Doing this full time?
I don't work on video games full time anymore. COVID was actually the impetus for Compile, and also for a whole round of like quitting work and soul searching again. So yeah, just following calls and be willing to take risks. I think that's kind of like the recipe that allowed me to give myself permission in a way to follow those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That sounds very similar to my origin story, so to speak. I graduated on Star Wars Day, May the 4th, 2019. So, like, right before, well, roughly right before the pandemic, or roughly a year before the pandemic. And so, my goal was to work in high schools, and I wanted to be a high school strength coach. And then the pandemic happened and completely shifted gears, closed a lot of doors, opened some. And then I kind of shifted my gaze to online coaching. And I didn't go full time in online coaching until 2022 when I started working remotely full time. None of that, nothing since the pandemic would have happened without the pandemic. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And then in 23, so 22, I started working for another business full time doing online coaching. And then on my 1 year anniversary, which happened to be the 111th anniversary of the Titanic sinking, I quit my job. And I decided, I'm sinking my career along with the Titanic. And so, half joking, and very similar to you, I quit without a safety net. And I had to, due to contracts, I had a non-compete to where I couldn't start an online coaching business while working for another coaching business. And so I quit my job in April of 23 and have been doing it for, 20 months full time. And so it's one of those things. I was very similar to you. We were in a position, I was slightly older, significantly older than you at the time. I was 29, roughly, maybe just 30. I forgot how old I was. But anyway, around 30 and no kids. We just bought a house, but no other major assets to speak of. And I was like, I can do this now, crash and burn, knowing I gave it my all, rather than like in 10 years, have a couple kids and be handcuffed and feel resentful playing the what if game. And so I would rather know that I gave it my all and not be successful than play the what if game. And I think a lot of people aren't able to take that step, either like financially able or like mentally and emotionally able, to saying, I'm accepting a fate that's probably going to lead to failure, but I have to do it just purely, I need to know. One of those things. I think you might have used the word, you had a calling, you were answering calls, and that was metaphorical calls, I assume. And that was very much like me. I was like, man, there's just this desire in me to do things on my own, serve gamers in a way that I wasn't before, and I needed to do it. And everyone was like, it's probably not a smart idea, but you seem pretty motivated. We'll support you. Nobody ever was like, yo, that's stupid. But my mom was like, I have literally no idea what you're doing, but you seem to have a good head on your shoulders, and so I support you. And I'm like, well, I'm glad somebody does.
Yeah, and I think it could be concerning, at least when, like, in all of the periods where I made these significant shifts, I think you get that a lot, right? Loved ones will be concerned. And I think that's a good thing, right? Your passion is yours. They're not going to they're not going to have like 100% empathy for that passion. And I think, yeah, there's a certain level of confidence that you do need to foster to be able to just follow, to have a feeling and follow it. But then, we mentioned like not everyone can do that. So like there's a balance between like how much risk can you take, and then letting some dreams that are kind of like unattainable or feel untenable at the moment die down a little bit, so that there's a little more space, not to like fill up with random junk, but new dreams just like feel out what you want. Because I feel like everyone has that capability inside of them, but it gets like that idea of like self-reflection, I think, gets pushed to the side very often, like too easily.
Yep. And I think a big part of it is, are you familiar with the spoon analogy?
Like how many spoons you have.
Yeah, like we all have the same number of spoons in the day,
Yeah.
and sometimes I like using spell slots, the term spell slots, but for obvious reasons. But it's like a lot of people in life, and this isn't necessarily specifically for gamers, but a lot of people in life tax all of their spoons or spell slots on work, and then like just activities of daily living. So they have no extra mana to spend on investing in their future, right? And so you seem to be an entrepreneur. I am as well. You may be familiar with Alex Hormozy. You might not be, but he's big in like the fitness business space. And his whole thing is you need to work like 12, 16-hour days. And people are giving him shit because they think that he's implying that you need to work for, quote unquote, the man for 12 to 16 hours a day each day.
Oh.
And he's saying work your 9 to 5 job. And then when you're done with that, that's when the real work begins, when you're investing in your future. And I think working 2 8-hour shifts in a day is probably a bit excessive. But he talks about doing that all for your 20s so that way you can be setting yourself up for the rest of your life, which, again, albeit as extreme, he has a good point to where, let's say you're working a 9 to 5 job, even if you can carve out 1-2 hours a day, instead of like playing video games, focus on building video games in our example here, but just focus on building your future, whether it's consuming YouTube video tutorials to learn this new skill, again, following the gaming route, learn the tools and skills to use whatever RPG Maker, Unreal, Unity, and then build from there. So where, like you said, you're kind of having to put your dream on hold, knowing that if I'm only able to spend 10 hours a week on things, I'm going to be progressing at a slower rate than if I'm able to spend 10 hours a day. But I know I'm at least taking the right steps, and I'm taking steps toward that goal. And it's, kind of the cliche, somebody who's crawling is doing laps around somebody sitting on the couch. That's very much true in what we're talking about, but also with fitness too, to where even if you're not able to do everything, go to the gym 5 days a week and do everything that you want to do today, starting yesterday, diet starts January 1st, and you're only able to go to the gym once a week or even just do some body weight stuff at home, you're still progressing in the right direction. And I think that is very true with fitness, like I talk about a lot, but also kind of like what you were saying, where even if you can't invest full time into it, you can still invest some time and make steps in the right direction. And so although it seems like both of us quit our jobs to pursue our dreams, that's not necessarily the underlying message here.
Yeah, totally. I like one phrase you said, which is the real work. Like you go do your 9 to 5 and then you're kind of like done with your responsibilities. I would put that in the same bucket as like washing dishes, like showering every day. Those are just like things we know we have to do because the like doing that for long periods of time can like sustain this idea of the real work you mentioned. And I think where a lot of people, like the trap a lot of people fall in is like, you go to work or you get your first job, someone tells you what to do, they have expectations for you, they may not be clear, different levels of clarity on those goals, but someone is always kind of like accountable for directing your focus and energy. And I think like, when it comes to real work, that's like if I ever have just a desire to make a new game, that's always the first thing is like, how can I allocate time and energy for this, and what is my direction? Like, where do I want to face? And like, I can sit on that question for months, honestly, before like getting started on a game. And again, that's just like I have the privilege of doing that. Other people take whatever time you need, but I think like keeping the focus on what you want to do and breaking it up into little parts and making that decision so that no one else has to make that decision for you is really important.
Absolutely. And I like how you're saying like you can sit and think on an idea, and it sounds like kind of like build even like a mental roadmap of where do I see this idea going? What are some benchmark achievement points that I can make? As far as like game design, I don't really know until you have like a MVP, minimal viable product. But as far as like fitness side of things, it's like, okay, I want to start a fitness journey. What's a realistic goal? If you're most people that I work with want to lose an excessive amount of weight. And so I say 50 pounds in a year, I think is very realistic because it allows for indulgences, allows for you to hit the brakes while also hitting gas sometimes of the year. So I think that's a good benchmark. And it sounds like that's kind of a similar process to what you're doing in your head when you have a new idea. It's like, okay, I have this idea. I'm also working on 6 other projects. Where does this fit in? Oh, I still need to sleep. Okay, maybe I need to pump the brakes on this, and this to make that happen. So circling back, what was that first product or project that you went from, this is a passion project of mine to play with friends, to this is now something that's released to the public and I'm actually monetizing it?
Yeah, compile. Actually, it took a long time of making other people's games for me to finally make something that resonated well enough that I thought it had enough legs to pursue as an actual publishable product. And yeah, it just at the beginning of the pandemic, it was me and my wife sitting in our kitchen running out of things to do and like say to each other's faces. And it just occurred to me kind of like magically one day that I love card games. Like I played Magic and Pokemon and the Warcraft TCG, like all sorts of card games for my whole life. And in the quiet of quarantine was able to just like reflect on some of the best experiences that I had, and realized in that thinking that I had a lot of unique things to say about my experience in card games. And then Compile just ended up being kind of like a reflection of those desires that I had for a card game. And then just being able to like bounce them off my wife, who doesn't have that kind of experience, but like, respected me and my work well enough to, give it a chance. And yeah, I worked on it for a while. And then I really wanted to publish it because it felt so dear to me, and I'd rather it be done well and make no money, but still be something I'm proud of. My pride for it had nothing to do with monetary compensation. It was just like at every step of what I'm doing, can I look at the work that I've done and think like that I did good work? Do I feel like I have to ask myself like, can I do better? Can I avoid that question by just, every letter I type, every piece of paper I cut, do it with some level of pride. Yeah, and that drove, I think at some point I was like, I was so proud of the work that I realized like, oh, actually I don't know enough about I don't know enough about manufacturing and publishing a board game. So I asked for help. And then yeah, that was the big thing, getting other people involved. That's like in that process, that's I think when it really made the transition into something that could be successful. To like other people.
Yeah, to where you just were kind of following that thread until you realized, well, this is an actual thing.
Yeah.
Nice. I really liked how you said, I want to be proud of this. And it sounds like I am going to be proud of this, regardless of if this is just a one-off prototype that I play with my family with nobody else, or if this becomes something that gets released to the mass market. And I think that mindset is what holds a lot of people back, because I think a lot of people in similar situations like this, where they want to play a game or build a game, tabletop, video, whatever it is, or write a book, or start a business, they do this for the love of the paycheck, right? They're doing this because, oh, this can make money. Look at how much money Baldur's Gate 3 makes. Look how much money D&D, Wizards of the Coast bring in. Look at how much money Brandon Sanderson brings in. And they're always looking at like exceptions to the rule rather than the actual rule itself.
Yeah.
Instead of doing it for the love of the game, in a literal sense, for our respect, to where I am enjoying this process. And even if I create, again, this one thing this manuscript, this one video game, or if I just have a business that just brings in enough money to pay for my game addiction, for example, then you can still be proud of it. And I think a lot of people need to have that perception check, if you will, change in perception to continue, because if you're constantly chasing the paycheck and you realize, well, this is like a very long endeavor until I can actually pay myself, then you're going to really see burnout. And to turn it back to fitness, it's like that person whose goal is to lose 50 pounds, and then they go to the gym and hit everything perfectly for a week, and then they step on the scale and they've only lost 1 pound. They are still progressing in the right way, but they are now demotivated because they're like, I just put in all this work and I have to do this again 50 times. And then God forbid they gain a pound or they don't lose any weight. And then it becomes extremely demotivating because they're constantly focusing on the end product or end goal, the finish line, rather than every step, like baby steps. And so you just saying, I'm doing it for the love of the game, I think is a huge mindset check that I don't want to downplay.
Totally.
So give me TLDR. What is Compile? Pitch it to me.
Yeah, Compile's a small box. It's $20 2-player card game about 2 AIs that just have manifested into being like in a group of many different AIs, and they're all trying to have this kind of like debate or conversation where they pit different ideas against each other to try to understand reality, or at least like human reality. So it's a card game with small decks where you don't build a deck like in Magic, where you have hundreds of cards and you pick and choose individual cards to make a deck. In Compile, cards are broken up into sets where it's like fire has 6 cards and then water has 6 cards, and you have individual protocols, which are those 1 words that you'll make a deck out of. So like I can do fire, water, and darkness, and then you would play metal, gravity, and light. And then we just take turns playing 1 card at a time, adding power to our side while trying to disrupt our opponents. So like a highly interactive game, and it's like there's a lot of call and response and back and forth. Like people describe it as like a tug of war. In my head, I kind of think of it as like a racing game, but it's like it's actually like logged in Board Game Geek as a tug of war game. And but yeah, you're just trying to generate power so that you can get enough power under one of the words to compile it, and then you just flip the card, and the first person to flip all three of their words just wins immediately.
Oh, nice. Okay. Okay. So it's not like a deck building game like Ascension where you're all still pulling from the same
Right.
pot.
There are some kind of like light dynamic deck building, like deck building where it's like you're building the deck through the gameplay. There's like a little bit of that, and then there's some protocols like love or assimilation that involve like more of that deck building feel as you play the game. But yeah, definitely not the core of the game. Like there's no packs. Like when you buy the box, it just has all the content in it. And then like next year we'll just have another wave of content, and like you can start playing there, or you can start playing with any wave and just like add, just have a larger pool of content to pull from.
Nice. Okay. Cool. And then you said there's got to be some form of element to sabotage the other players. What are some, I guess, brief, broad strokes of the mechanics?
Sure, yeah. So cards, so every turn you get like one action, and that's either play a card, or I can waste my whole turn to draw cards. And I can play a card face up for typically like some powerful ability, and then cards have power on them, and that's the power that you're trying to accrue is that big number on the cards. So I like how that's accessible, where someone who isn't very familiar with card games, they can just focus on trying to get the numbers to 10, and you don't really have to worry about like the impacts of the text too much. You can also play cards face down anywhere. If you play a card face up for its powerful text, it has to be played in a very specific location, so it kind of restricts how you can play cards. So there's a lot of tension. It's like, I want to race you to 10 here. I don't have the cards that go in the area where I want to play. I may play some cards face down, or plan on leveraging the abilities of the other protocols in my deck to help me disrupt your cards in that line over there. Yeah, so a lot of like moving cards around, flipping them up and down. There's no tokens, so it's just cards, and that was kind of like one of the big constraints I had when making it. Like when COVID started, I was like, oh well, here's the end of the world. Can I just make like a cheap game that some people can play before everything falls apart? Yeah. So it was just like how as few cards as possible, no tokens, like really like in the box it's just like a rule sheet. It's not even a rule book. Yeah.
Nice.
Happy to
Nice.
answer more questions about it, but it's like so it looms so big in my head. It's like hard to stay focused on it.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, one thing you said, what was it? Fighting each other. Face down cards. I really like how you said there are face down cards, because it sounds like there's no dead cards. So where you have a card in your hand that's just completely useless because it's not going the route that you want to play. And I like that because there's a Kickstarter that I backed, and I only backed it admittedly because one of my clients was on the board of it or whatever. And it was called Cryptic. It came out a few years ago on Kickstarter. It's like, how do I want to say this? It's kind of like Magic, to where you have your own deck, you build your own deck, and then you fight. But there are 6 kind of like life cards, so it's almost like Pokemon in a way, where part of your deck is like face down in front of you. Yeah, and except of it being prizes, of where you take it when you do something, you defeat the opponent, it's vice versa. So if they hit you, you take it, you get it, so it does help you, but then you only have 6 life points, if you will. And the reason why I like that is because every card can be flipped upside down for mana. And so there's no dead card, but you are kind of sacrificing, do I want to use this for its abilities, or do I want to use this for its mana cost? And so I like that. And it sounds like yours has a similar theme, to where you're never going to be sitting in your hand thinking, this is all junk, I can't do anything with it.
Yeah, totally. I think one of like the design philosophies is like all killer, no filler. Like every single card you want to play, like you should read the text of any card and look at its number and say, wow, that's like a value proposition that is immediately obvious to me, and I want to use it. But then yeah, there is the flexibility of just being able to apply it anywhere. And that kind of circles back to one thing I mentioned earlier of just like, at the head of COVID, in that moment of self-reflection and realizing how much I love card games and just wanted more card games in my life. I don't like the pacing of Magic. I played Magic for a long time, and I don't like getting land screwed. I don't like how big the decks were. Like it just all felt too random.
Well, especially Commander.
Right. Like, and it's funny, right? Because I think Magic as a product has leaned more towards Commander, just because I
It
think
has, yeah.
that's the space where it performs the best. I think that format leverages what Magic is good at, and I think that's cool. When we talk about Pride, because like I would not make Commander, even though I enjoy playing Commander. That's not a game I would design, but I would design something that is still tempo focused, but has like a lot more flexibility in the cards. Like that matches like my preferences as a player better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think Magic likes Commander because it does set themselves apart from most games which have the 60 card standard style gameplay, especially the big three, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Magic. Commander does have a good way to set themselves apart. And so I agree with that. And so one thing I wanted to ask is, like I said, most people have games buzzing in their head. What are some actionable steps that somebody can take as early as right now to get started? And then it can be in the tabletop space, could be the video game space. It sounds like you have experience with both. I assume video game would probably be lower barrier to entry because of lack of manufacturing, but I could be completely wrong. So what are some steps that somebody can take right now to make their thoughts and dreams more of a reality than maybe they expect?
Yeah, I think people already have the majority of the skills they need to get started, because I think the first step for any project, not even just games, like even doing something around the house, is writing stuff down. Make a list of stuff that you're excited about. So like with regards to compile, like card game, 2 players, cheap. Like these are things that I had feelings about, not things that I pulled from the internet because they were buzzy and sounded good, or I thought they had like synergy with the market. It was like, no, I felt things about those. So yeah, so writing it down. What are the ideas? And why are you doing this? Is this for someone, like if I'm putting up shelves, like do I have an idea of what I want to put on those shelves? Am I just trying to fill my time to just like have a project? Like am I trying to learn how to do woodworking? And so whatever desires that exist, I would put all of those down on paper first, and I think that's super powerful. One, just having that legacy of your thinking like as you move forward, I think can be very powerful. But also just like getting things out of your head. It's so easy to have ideas and then let them exist in your head, and then they just kind of like fall to some darker part of your brain, and then a new idea pops up, and then you'll just kind of like cycle between ideas in your head, and nothing ever gets realized because of those. And I really like, just like, I have a notepad with like 20 pages on my computer open. Just like anytime I have a thought, just like, oh, new page, and just like start writing thoughts that I have about this. And then, maybe 80% of the pages in the notepad I'll just discard, a week later, and never think about again. But then, that 20% is something that, if when I have a moment to myself, I can look back on and see like, oh, okay, I can follow this thread that was started in the past, and because I did that work before, now I can pick this up where I left off. I don't have to retread any, old ground that isn't fruitful anymore, because I've kind of like already traveled it. So yeah, I think that's like for any project, that's like step one, most important part.
For sure. No, I love that because, like you said, you get the ideas buzzing in your head and they're intangible, right? They're ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you write them down, either on a digital format or pen and paper, they become real to an extent. And when you do this and ideally kind of brain dump your ideas, and then the next step, I assume, would be coming up with some form of roadmap. What are the steps I need to take? You get the dopamine reward response as if you were doing those things when you write them down.
Totally.
And so that can be reinforcing behavior. It can also be detrimental because then it can keep you in that loop. But it can be reinforcing, saying this is, like a legit idea. This could be some form of viable project. Again, not necessarily saying that we're going to be the next Brandon Sanderson or Larian Studios, but this is something that could become a reality. And so having that time to plan things out, even in a broad strokes roadmap type of thing, brain dump, that can boost that motivation to do that. And I do the same thing, though. Sometimes I have a notebook right here. I have over probably 50 pages in here just of like my D&D campaign of just the ways, like the skeleton story. And now I use this for another side project, the Healthy Adventure, that I use within my coaching. And all stuff because I've written it down. And I like how you said you do like different pages, because I bet, I could be wrong, but I'm probably not, that some of those scrapped ideas were then seeds for more viable ideas. To where you're like, yeah, I like this element, but I don't necessarily like this. Maybe if we take this, twist this, and throw this into this already existing idea or more baked up idea, then it's not useless, right? It's now has some sustenance somewhere else. And so that might not have happened if you didn't have that page, even if it's a couple of sentences written out, to where it's all helping each other. And it's like, not to go into a tangent, but if you're working out and building muscle, you'd use your muscles more often, they get bigger, right? It's the same with like your brain. If you're in a more creative mindset all the time, then you become more creative. You know what I mean? To where you spend more time in that mindset. So therefore that mindset gets easier and you start going and expanding and building from there. And if you keep writing your ideas down and building new ideas, then the ideas tend to become easier, more in depth, more fleshed out, because you keep building those neural pathways. And I like that.
Yeah, and I think it's also a big confidence booster to give yourself to like have an idea. Like all ideas are predicated on something you're feeling. They manifest like of your person. Like they matter. What, you know, whether the idea can be valuable externally, like you had that idea, that indicates to you that there's something important there to you. And I think writing what you can about the idea kind of like gives the space for you to have emotions about it and treat it as important. Like give it kind of like some reverence. You know, it's like sanctifying it by writing on the paper.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's kind of like the golden cliche, I'm writing a contract to myself. In a way you're not, but also in a way you are, because you're making it a reality to the world. I'm writing this down, this idea down. And I know we're coming up to time and I have another question, but I would say after that idea, then you can start researching on how to make what you put on paper more of a reality. And for me, I have some experience with RPG Maker when I was trying to make my own Pokemon game. Again, more of a passion project. And then the newer one when I was trying to make my D&D campaign into a Final Fantasy-esque turn-based RPG. It's YouTube. Like you're going to find everything that I needed I found on YouTube. And a lot of times if you're doing something that is a popular format, like Unity, even Unreal 5 to an extent, and definitely RPG Maker, there's more often than not an awesome community of people that have playlists and tutorials set up for you.
Yeah, I'd also highly suggest things like Reddit or just like any kind of like public forum space where asking questions is very normal and you can see people's discussions over time. So like YouTube is nice. Like I'll go to YouTube if I'm blocked by some hard skill, then like, yeah, I can go to YouTube and find something specific. But I do like just going onto Reddit and saying like, here's an idea that I have. Like, are there any thoughts? Like, here I am, like kind of like being vulnerable and sharing it with people. And I think that's also a big step, like taking the step from like just having it for yourself to then being able to share it to people. But it's a step that has to be done with any piece of art that anyone makes. So yeah, do that early as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a subreddit for everything, right? So I think you could find some stuff. Cool. How can people either get a hold of you and or get their hands on Compile and any other projects that you have?
Yeah, I wish people could get Compile. It's sold out. More will be coming out next year. We're like saving a bunch of stock for local game stores, so hopefully that's available there. I have a website, justgravyllc.com, and on that website you'll be able to get to a back order page for Compile, and then there's like some more information about my work and other Compile stuff. And then on Board Game Geek is where I do like most of my professional socializing now, since like Compile is the first product that's mine, like it has my name on it specifically. That's where I end up doing professional communications.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you hopping on, Michael. This was an exciting story. I definitely wanted to ask more questions, but time didn't allow it. So definitely check out his pages. I'll have all the links in the description and everything like that. So again, thank you very much. And I guess until next time.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me.